Okay, I think I'm going to start. Before we begin, a request actually to all participants except the panelists to please keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off. We do welcome your contributions, so please do post your questions through to the Q&A channel, which we will take up as much as possible. So welcome all to the second in the series of webinars being hosted by the recently established Warwick Interdisciplinary Research Center for International Development. The center's key points of focus are inequality and social, political, and economic change on a global level. Professor Shireen Rai is the inaugural director and the spirit behind this center, which I hope many of you will follow by checking out our website and keeping up with a whole range of programs that the center offers. This webinar has been organized by the Critical South Asia group that I convene at the University of Warwick. We are a collective of faculty and research students who are committed to studying the region of South Asia and to bringing critical and activist questions to our academic concerns. A fortnight ago, we looked at COVID-19 and the migrant labor question in our first webinar. Today, we are talking about citizenship matters, and in future weeks, we aim to look at COVID-19, South Asia, and the question of gender and of the economic implications of the pandemic in our region. I would like to thank Maeve Moynihan for her immense help in putting these together. Today, of course, it is, who is a citizen and how does it matter? These are two of the key questions we want to pose to our panelists, especially as our regimes would precisely like us to forget these questions. These questions, of course, have long haunted all the nation states in South Asia, but have assumed even greater significance, if not urgency, during the time of this pandemic, which is, of course, also being used in a way, kind of like an emergency. The repression in Kashmir, the Anti-Constitutional Citizenship Amendment Act, the targeting of dissenters, especially students involved in protesting CAA, the further immiseration of Dalits and adivasis, the violent attacks on Muslims in India, the suppression of minorities in Pakistan, the growing Islamophobia in Sri Lanka, the list is endless. Fortunately, we have a fantastic panel of discussants who can help us understand this particular conjuncture of COVID-19 and citizenship matters. And they have very, valiantly agreed to a webinar, to participation in a webinar, although I know some of them may be skeptical of such a form being actually able to generate conversations, but we hope to do that today. On the panel are Mahtab Alam, who's a reporter with The Wire, Malathi de Alwis, who's a socio-cultural anthropologist based in Colombo, Adil Hossain from Merton College, University of Oxford, Mirza A. Jaffer, who's a journalist and researcher with the Al-Khoi Foundation, and Niraja Jayal, who's with the Center for the Study of Law and Governance at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to you all, and thank you for taking time out for this. And I hope, of course, you've all been safe and well. I will now invite each of you to reflect on this moment and the challenges it is throwing up for thinking about questions of citizenship, who belongs, who doesn't, who does the state care for, and who it can neglect or even oppress further. Please feel free to take 5 to 7 minutes each. Following this first round, I will collate a few questions from our audience, and we will end with concluding reflections from each of you. So let us begin. Mahtab, would you like to start?
Thank you, Rashmi, for inviting me and for the introduction. I'll start with the passage of Citizenship Amendment Bill, which happened last year, and then briefly talk about what has happened in last few months, especially since December 2019. And I'll focus on response of Muslims and how CA and the anti-CA protest has affected their life and what are their concerns. And during the COVID COVID period and during the lockdown, what is happening with them. So I'll focus on that, and so that my intervention here will be very limited, but focused. So let me start with this, that the passage of CA uh, Citizenship Amendment Bill in the Indian Parliament in December 2019 was not the first time when the Indianness of Indian Muslim uh, was questioned. Ever since the partition, we see that every now and then, constantly, Indianness of Indian Muslim is being uh, constantly uh, under attack, they have been asked whether they are Muslim, they're Indian or not. And in 90s, the Muslims of India were often asked that whether you are Indian first or Muslim first. So thankfully, in the last, due to several reasons, in the last 10 years or 5 years, I see that question is not being asked that much. Maybe because a new middle class or the vocal class amongst Muslim have emerged over a period of time, which was not there, I would say, post-partition or pre-liberalization period. So that may be the reason. But when we look at the CA thing, which I mean the bill which became law in December 2019, called CEA, there is a fundamental difference. In earlier instances, when Muslims were questioned and it was basically their loyalty which was under under question. Whether they are loyal to India or the idea of India or the state or not. But post, say, this CAA becoming a law, their very citizenship is under question, under attack. So and this is a fundamental question Muslims are facing. So earlier, there is also, in other words, that earlier we saw that only those Muslims who were religious, who were practicing, their Indianness were often questioned. But say the liberal, progressive people, or those who were considered good Muslims, their citizenship or the loyalty was not questioned that much. But with a law like CA, which should be seen together with NRC and NPR, increasingly what has happened that the citizenship of Indian Muslims have become a big issue, and it has become, say, life and death question for them. So it's because of that we saw that for the first time, I think perhaps for the first time in the history of India, that so many Indian Muslims from different walks of life. Before becoming full-time journalist, I worked as an activist for a decade at least, with several organizations, with the grassroots organizations, and including Amnesty International. But I had not seen something like this. Maybe this might have had happened before my birth or during, say, in other time, but I had not seen. So this has affected all sorts of all kinds of Muslims with all kind of suffix and prefix, progressive or not progressive, religious, practicing, atheist, whatever cultural. There are different things. So that's why, and also the participation of Muslim women, ordinary Muslim women. It's not that Muslim women were not participating in protest, they were not parts of the struggle, but for the first time, we saw that ordinary Muslim women and their leadership has emerged through this. So we saw from December, especially December 15, 2019 was a very crucial day because that was the day when students of Jamia were marching towards parliament in New Delhi. They were attacked, brutally attacked, they were beaten. Uh, and that triggered a series of protests. After that, the protest in Shaheen Bagh was started, and Shaheen Bagh became a model, and rightly so. And it was replicated in not just in capital cities, say in Bangalore or in Ranchi or in Patna or a different say capital cities of India, but in small towns also. I come from a very small town uh, in North Bihar called Supol, which is often not heard or known. But there also I saw when I went there in March, I saw people, women protesting CA, NPR. Similarly, during my visit to say Kishanganj in Bihar again, that I saw at least a dozen of protests, similar protests happening in different nook and corner of villages, small villages of. And what was interesting to note that most of the time these protests were not say supported by local political parties or say established NGOs and civil society organizations. These initiatives were taken, they were spontaneous, and it was based on the model of say Shaheen Bagh. So that was, but it was becoming difficult also for women and protesters to sustain it. And one had thought, and that's why you see that before the Janta curfew, which had happened, which was on, I think, on 21st of March 2020, uh, these protests were called off. Uh, and meanwhile, what had also happened that in different states, especially the non-BJP ruled states, several assemblies had passed resolution that they will not implement NPR and NRC and CEA. So, like in Jharkhand, in Telangana, in Chhattisgarh, and other say non BJP ruled states. So one thought that this lockdown or the COVID thing has come as a say blessing in disguise, I quote unquote. Uh, but what we saw and what we have been seeing, especially in Delhi and Uttar Pradesh and say Telangana also for that matter, the kind of targeted arrest happening of anti-CA protesters. In Delhi, we have been seeing Delhi also witnessed in February witnessed anti-Muslim violence. There is no other name it can be called, and it should be called. It was not a riot. I mean, what we have been seeing in the press or by a large number of, say, even moderate progressive people, that they are trying to balance that as if that it was a sort of equal fight and both the parties were responsible and are responsible. So that is there. Even today, if you look at the number of arrests, it is very clear that large. I mean, if you look at the casualty, you will find more number of Muslims were killed. Similarly, arrest also. Not only that, if you look at the charges or the panel or the cases they have been, say, Muslims are charged with and the Hindus are charged with, there is a marked difference between the two. So, and similarly, what is happening in Uttar Pradesh, and the current chief minister has become a law on unto himself, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court of India has not been able to play a very good role in this. Um, they have not played what they should be. Thankfully, the lower courts in different parts of, say, India, subordinate courts also, or high court also, some of them like Allahabad High Court, Karnataka High Court, and some other courts have played a really very positive role, or the role they should be playing in first place. So that is also there. So arrest is there. Then if you then came this Tablighi Jamaat thing, and it became a tool, another tool to suppress and spread rumors and hatred about Muslims. And its result, we have been seeing several people committed suicide, several people were arrested on, and later it was we came to know that those news were false. Hmm. Uh, uh, so that is another thing, and what we have been seeing that uh, uh, it this lockdown has become a tool to, so another tool to, say, target Muslims, and especially dissenting Muslims, whosoever is, say, uh, uh, talking. So recently what has happened, that there are several, as I was saying in the beginning, that thankfully in the last few years, and that is my observation also, and that is a subject on which I'm writing a book as well, that in the last few uh, years, especially in last 10-15 years, what we have seen, that there is a new kind of activism among young Muslims, which has emerged, which, and these people are from small places. They are not Khandani Muslims, or with cultural capital, or only from Lucknow, or say Allahabad, they went to Aligarh, that kind of, no. We have not heard of people like Ikra Khilji, Hussain Haidari, this kind of, and or Nabia Khan, this Rehana Sultana. So this has emerged. But what is happening recently is they have been targeted. So take the case of Ikra Khilji. What is happening? She is a student in Ahmedabad in a law university, and she is being very vocal. And in order to protest, she is been using poetry, protest poetry, form of protest poetry. Mm-hmm. And this is something which is very interesting. It is being done by young Muslims in Assam. You might have heard of Mia poetry. Similarly, in Delhi also, Amir Aziz, Nabia Khan, and other people. Similar, Ikra. So she's been constantly targeted, and not just personally targeted. Her institution is also being targeted, approached, that she should be kicked out from the university. Similarly, Hussain Haidari is facing problem. He is not getting, say, he's a fine lyricist, but he is not getting support from his own, within the industry. All people are saying that go slow. So that is also happening. Or
okay, Mahtab, I'll stop you here for now and possibly come back to you during questions, because it's fascinating what you are saying, and I think you have, in a really pointed way, talked about, you know, that this particular moment in which the shift has happened from Muslims as disloyal citizens to as non-citizens, which the new act is bringing about. So really important, fascinating stuff. Thank you, Mehtab. We'll be coming back to you during discussion.
Sure.
Let's move on to Malathi now. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Rashmi, for inviting me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to try to speak briefly, but I think I also want to kind of set the context for a discussion about citizenship, because I think Sri Lanka is, I think, in a very problematic situation throughout the pandemic, because we didn't have a parliament functioning because the parliament was around March 4th, because we were going to have elections on April 25th.
Mm-hmm.
So once we went into curfew, we've basically had no legislative oversight over executive actions. So I think this is a very serious situation, and this has resulted in the president appointing lots of task forces. And if you have time, I'll get into also the problems of those task forces, because I think we also then seeing a militarization and a securitization of government as well as governance. So I think that is a very troubling scenario for any citizen of the country. Within that context, then we also have seen a resurgence of Islamophobia, and I would, recall last year with the Easter Sunday bombings. There was a resurgence of Islamophobia even in that context. There were actual attacks against Muslims. So, just a year later, it's been troubling to see how it has returned in various forms. And I'll just pick on sort of, three aspects to talk about. I think the early days when we were first getting news of who was infected, that's when Islamophobia reared its ugly head, because one of the, I think about the third patient, the fatality we had was a Muslim. And then, what we have is the tracings of all his family. And so then this production of, because Muslims live in, enclaves, that, they were the spreaders. And ironically, so that was a very troubling moment. But ironically, what happened was the next major spreader was the Navy. So you really had a shift in perspective suddenly from this very racist viewing of Muslims as spreaders of disease to then, and the media behaved atrociously, where there was no privacy for the people who were infected, or even, others who were being taken in. I mean, they were releasing names. You could see beatings of Muslims, because people were resisting. They were just being dragged off into quarantine, and this was all on on TV. So very troubling. And then of course you had social media fueling it further with absolutely horrific viterative comments then about the Muslims. That has been complicated, as I said, by now the largest spreader being the Navy. It's just, it's huge. I mean, the most amount of infected now we have are within the Navy, and now some of it spread to the Army. And part of it, of course, that they didn't have enough equipment when they were moving people, to the quarantine, or tracing people, and that's how they caught it. But in the context then of the fatality of, I think there were two Muslim fatalities, there arose this other very problematic decree that all bodies should be cremated out of nowhere, because the WHO, doesn't have that regulation. There were concerns at the first Muslim fatality about where he was going to be buried. There were arguments that the groundwater was very high, and so if you buried somebody, then he was going to contaminate the water source. And I think not looking at understanding about this virus. I mean, there are a lot of virologists who have said that actually when you die, the virus dies. It doesn't exist in the body. So, but there was nothing. It was just overall, and there have been a lot of protests by Muslims and others who are supportive of burial. But that's the decree. And then any other Muslim deaths who are not even COVID related, there were these moves to try to cremate. So this has created a lot of concern, and it has also resulted then in a lot of Muslims not want to come forward even to get tested, because the assumption is that if you're tested and we die, we are going to have this very irreligious form of cremation. So that has been a debate that has been ongoing. A lot of Muslim politicians also have raised it, but also resulted in a lot of very ugly comments in the social media. The other aspect I wanted to raise is also, I mean, I think you talked about migrant labor in your previous panel, but it's interesting about the fact that it has come up in ways also in Sri Lanka in terms of which citizen has rights to return. So we've had a lot of focus. I mean, the first, we had a plane load of students we brought from Wuhan in the very early days, and then the next round was we brought workers from South Korea, and then we also had migrant labor from Italy coming back. But then there's been a shift again to bring students back, but the greatest resource that we have are the workers in the Middle East. And a lot of them are in dire straits because their visas have expired, they have lost jobs, and they're living on the streets, and they have been begging the government to bring them back. And we have a particular example I would draw from Kuwait, but what has happened is when they brought a lot of these workers back, they found the majority of them were infected. So there was this thing that we even had a politician saying that Kuwait is sending a time bomb back to us, which you don't talk about the citizens like that, and also labor that we are completely dependent on in Sri Lanka, because that the significant proportion of our GDP is remittances. So that has also been very troubling debate then about who do you let back into your country, though they're all citizens of Sri Lanka. The third one I want to talk briefly is then, as I was saying, about kind of the no legislative oversight. And in that context, we've had the president appointing a series of task forces. I mean, one was to oversee the whole COVID-19 response, but we've had two more recent ones that were gazetted on June 2nd. The first one, I think, speaks very troubling to all of us, because, and I'm just going to read out what the task force is called. It's called to build a secure country, disciplined, virtuous, and lawful society. So it's like huge, very broad kind of mandate. And it's very vague. There are references to antisocial activities, illegal activities, and the argument is that it was brought to control drug trafficking. But it's ironic because we have enough drug trafficking bodies to address that. So why then bring in this task force? And the task force is full of military personnel, either who are retired or who are current, as well as law and order personnel. The second task force, and that I think comes back to the Islamophobia I was talking about again, it's called the Archaeological Heritage Management Task Force for the Eastern Province. And in the Eastern Province, we've been having quite a few clashes, and they've been going back over time of Buddhist sites located in Muslim communities. And so people battling for land within that, and the Buddhists constantly presenting that the Muslims are encroaching on these very sacred sites. But once again, this task force that was set up is overseen by the Secretary of the Ministry of Defense, who's a military guy, and it has two Buddhist monks. It's got two Sinhalese archaeologists. Actually, everybody on the task force are Sinhalese. Not a single Muslim or Tamil is represented on that, even though it's, we have plenty of Tamil archaeologists who could have been on this, and no community representatives from the Muslim community on this task force. So once again, I think it bodes, no good. So I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you, Mala. That was a very multi-layered sort of analysis of what is going on in Sri Lanka at all these different levels, both directly and indirectly, how the question of citizenship is becoming so problematic. So thank you for that. And to our participants, I would say you can start sending in your questions even as our speakers are talking. And at the end, of course, I will be putting questions together and asking them, but you don't have to wait till the very end. So after Mala, I would like to invite Adil to offer his reflections, 5 to 7 minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rashmi, for inviting me. It's a very important question at the moment, that who's a citizen, who's not, and especially I'm very happy that Mahtab Bhai spoke before me and gave a context with regard to the Muslim question right now and with regard to the Muslim citizenship. Because at the moment, Indian state is continuously defining citizenship with regard to its minorities, and especially the Muslims of India. And based on that, what happened with the Tablighi Jamaat incident, I wrote that piece which I call the biopolitics of pandemic citizenship. So I would like to take whereas Mahtab Bhai talked about the citizenship protest in Delhi, or what we saw in Calcutta, or even Ahmedabad. My research is on the 2002 Gujarat riots in Ahmedabad, but I am actually from a place in West Bengal, but my nearest city is Kishanganj, which is in Bihar. So it's a small village in West Bengal. So I will take the gaze from Delhi to this small village where recently what happened, that how when the discourses are set at the top, how that translate or percolate at the ground level. And I will share my screen. I'll show how a local newspaper, the Uttar Banga Sangbad, which actually reports from these 3-4 districts, 6 districts of West Bengal, how they were talking about that, how during this lockdown, especially that people are coming in and then they are actually bringing coronavirus to our district. And to show that obviously these are very heavily Muslim concentrated districts, Kishanganj and Uttar Dinajpur and Malda. So how he showed that. So I will share the screen here. Yes. Sorry, I think it's, I can do that. So basically what happened, I think I can't do that, but basically what happened that in my region, all of a sudden, especially in this Kishanganj border, all of a sudden, this heavy images of Muslims who are coming back, especially they are obviously wearing white cap and bearded, they are coming back, they are crossing these state borders, and especially, and this is also a time when BJP has won all the MP seats in North Bengal, and that is one of their most strongholds. So that is slowly also these narratives are reflected. What actually started in April first week in Delhi, these things are still being talked about in my village or in these border regions of Kishanganj, Uttar Dinajpur, where people are constantly seeing Muslims at as the agent of Corona. When I talked about that this specific technologies of government, when health officials called Muslims as responsible for the coronavirus, I said that it is bringing a new kind of biopolitics. And for the general audience, I would like to say, so mainly what French philosopher Foucault in his lectures in Paris in 1975, in a book called Society Must Be Defended, he said that the logic of the government is mainly for the welfare of people, and for this welfare of certain categories of people, some people are excluded. And mainly this idea of, you said, this quarantine practices and disciplinary mechanism about which philosopher Foucault wrote about extensively, and especially in his book Disciplinary and Punishment. And it all started with pandemic, and how during pandemic we keep patients, or we keep how we will confine them. And when he talked about all these people, these patients or mad, later on, obviously today we know that we also keep certain people in certain spaces, like old, in Europe, obviously the old ages people. And later on in this, when he talked about biopolitics, he talked about the apparatus of security, and which is kind of very different from the disciplinary mechanism. And here the philosopher actually talked about that it is just not the partition of space that we will put some people there, but also the philosopher talked about that this is a rationalization of certain crises, or bringing in statistics in that sense. In this sense, we see that how the confinement become a very important strategy for the government. And when the lockdown was started in late March, first, all of us, there were the news coming in about migrant laborers working on foot and everything in the late March. But all of a sudden, this news started to appear in April first week about the Tablighi Jamaat case, where the members of a Islamic sect in Delhi, they said that they were the main responsible for this virus in India. And all of a sudden, the entire IT cell of BJP started a concerted campaign. And by 5th of, I think, April, I think Time magazine reported that at least 160 million people on Twitter retweeted or engaged with this term called Corona Jihad with regard to Muslims of India. And that started, and at the time, mostly what was they talked about that contain the Muslims, keep them in certain places. And as I think philosopher Foucault said, that the technologies of the apparatus of security was employed in a way that they were not only disciplined, but criminal charges were being brought against them. So their relations, so Muslims were already, I think, as Mahtab Bhai talked about, that already have been othered and their citizenship is being defined as their alien. But right now they were giving a kind of, that they are the disease, that they are the pandemic citizens. That's how I think argued in my paper at the time. And slowly, as we can see that in this case, it was the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh and the Health Secretary who was actually constantly briefing the entire country. He actually by, I think, 16th of April, he said that the 30% of all the cases in India are due to these Tablighi Jamaat members. And we know from a report by Scroll by Shoaib Daniel that all these statistics were produced through a flawed methodology where only Muslims were tested, and then these numbers were projected later. And the kind of, at the time, the political statement came that they must be shot, they must be placed in some ways. Slowly what we see that what actually these kinds of, obviously a lot of incidents started in places like in Haldwani, a vegetable vendor was beaten up. These stories and fake videos that Muslims are spitting on vegetables, or a restaurant worker in Rajasthan, he's spitting in the food. Or there was even a fake video that was shared by, I think, a BJP IT cell head, where a Muslim is leaking the notes to circulate. So the Corona Jihad, so the way they define the biological feature of this certain kind of population was that they are the disease itself, and they must be contained. Obviously, the backlash that happened from the Middle East after that, especially when I think that actually kind of forced the Prime Minister Modi to say that, okay, Corona is affected all class and all section of the people. And we can see that from the labor, from the stories, the entire April, the right-wing media focused on these stories so much. What we saw recently, what I am actually getting news from my village and other places, is this, that right now when these lot of migrant laborers are reaching these villages on foot or on bicycle. Actually, bicycle is a very important vehicle during this pandemic, and I hear from them that how that became the main source of power within these migrant labor groups who have and who doesn't have. So when they are reaching in these villages, especially in our place, West Bengal government has assigned these primary schools as the for the quarantine center and everything. We see that local women in certain parts of Malda, who were assembled outside the local BDO office saying that no, this quarantine center can't happen here, and let them confine in open space. And also we have to see that who are the workers mostly. I'm definitely sure that obviously there are a lot of a section of tribal population and lower caste who are in the migrant population, but especially in parts like Kishanganj, Kathiawar, and Uttar Dinajpur and Malda, in this region from I am from, the most of the workers are Muslims, and the idea that they are the corona is now, the narrative is very much there, happening in the villages, and the local RSS unit or local BJP unit is still, so as I think Foucault said, that the way the confinement strategies are happening now, the same way possibly they will be new categories of people will be included. So so the first, actually, I think after these I think this corona jihad and everything, the first, I think, communal riots, I worked on 2002 in Ahmedabad, but the first riots that happened in Bengal, in Telinipara, here there was a report in Quint in, I think, early May, which said that, which mainly said that the Muslims spread corona, and they were mainly branded as corona, and that actually started this conflict. There is no doubt that there are, in my place, obviously, in the recent times, people from these Hindu right-wing groups have started to start small-scale conflict based on a Muslim boy eloping with a Hindu woman, or throwing beef in temples, which is like century-old tactics that has been there and I think studied by historians. But slowly, as I say, that these new ways to define Muslims as through the corona is also being included in these kinds of narratives. And one thing is important here, that because I worked on these on a internal displacement camp, these IDPs, or these people in Citizen Nagar outside Ahmedabad after the riots, I can see that the idea of camp or quarantining Muslim is becoming the main, or the containment strategy are becoming the main feature of these narratives. So after riots, let's have a camp for these people. So take them outside of this space in the same way. I think what Didier Fasson, the French philosopher, said, that that is becoming a response mechanism all of a sudden. After the CA also, that was the main narrative that West Bengal BJP chief said, that either they will be sent to Bangladesh or every district will have a camp in response to the CA and NRC. In the same way, COVID-19 is also creating these obviously this quarantine, and that is obviously a government mechanism to contain the disease. But ultimately, because of the systematic discrimination, or the systematic injustices, and especially even during the, I think I have to say that even during the left rule, these districts of Uttar Dinajpur, Malda, Murshidabad remain backward. The numbers of schools per square kilometer or number of health services per square kilometer are far less than that exist around Calcutta or other districts, or especially I think there are research that how Muslim dominated districts have, and also due to lack of job opportunities, they are more near Gurgaon or Noida. Or I found a lot of people from my region, the Kishanganj and Uttar Dinajpur, in Ahmedabad, while sitting in the local restaurants. So certainly these people who are now coming back, they are being given a new category. They are given, that's how I said that we define citizenship as being the member of a community. And and we talk about biological citizenship as what kind of, how their biological feature, or how their biological categories are defining their terms of membership in the community. In that sense, I believe that, be it migrant laborer in these small villages in Uttar Dinajpur, or when these riots are being started in Telinipara, the Muslims are now the pandemic citizens of India.
Thank you, Adil. I think you've added a really important, new dimension to our discussion. It's very disturbing and really fascinating. So thank you for that. I would like to invite Jaffer. I don't see him. Is he here?
I'm here, yes.
Okay, yes. So, yeah. We'd love to hear what you have to say. 5 to 7 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Rashmi, for organizing this important webinar. Due to time limitation, I would be very brief and try to cover first what's happening on the ground, and second, highlight a few cases of discrimination where religious minorities such as Shias, Christians, and Hindus were targeted. So before I come to my first part, I would like to mention that we are currently running a series called Religious Inequalities and the Impact of COVID-19 under our CREAT program, where we are publishing blogs and interviews on the impact of COVID-19 on religious minorities. So I'll drop the link if it interests anyone, please do visit the website. So what's happening on the ground, to put it very bluntly, Pakistan's response to COVID-19 has been a big disappointment. So far, more than 100,000 confirmed cases have been reported, and sadly, more than 2,000 people have died from the virus. I would blame the federal government led by Imran Khan for A, playing down the seriousness of COVID-19, and B, creating hurdles for Sindh government, which has been more active and prompt. I would also hold responsible the Supreme Court of Pakistan for interfering in politics and allowing shops to open before Eid, which led to massive increase in infection rate. Now hospitals are full in urban centers even before the peak, which is expected at the end of July or in early August. So I see a tough time ahead. But I would now quickly move to discuss the cases where religious minorities face discrimination. So it all started when COVID-19 hit Iran at the end of February, when the numbers of infection and death rates increased in the holy cities of Qom and Mashhad. Since many Pakistanis regularly visit Iran for different purposes, such as religious pilgrimage, trade, and tourism, on 23rd of February, Pakistan closed its all borders, freezing cross-border movement without giving much thought to Pakistanis who would be stranded in Iran as a result. So when the situation in Iran worsened and the federal government faced backlash for not doing anything for the stranded Pakistanis, the border was reopened to allow them to, most of the visitors in Iran to return to home. The provincial government of Balochistan, which shares the border with Iran, established quarantine camps for more than 4,000 returning Shia pilgrims. But the condition in camps was not livable. Such as miserable situation of bathrooms and unavailability of blanket. So pilgrims were initially quarantined in Balochistan, but the local provincial government was not prepared and ill-equipped, such as they didn't have testing capability and there were lack of isolation centers. So as a result, the Shia pilgrims were sent to their respective provinces without much deliberation. And this is where the discrimination against Shias and Hazaras in particular started. So in Balochistan, measures specifically targeting and restricting the movements of Hazara Shia began to be announced by a number of public authorities, even before the lockdown announced or enforced. In one notification on 12th of March, issued from the Office of Inspector General of Police in Quetta, which said that police members belonging to the Shia Hazaras were sent on leaves. On 13th of March, another government institution called Water and Sanitation Authority issued a statement in which says, and I quote, employees belonging to Hazara tribe and residing in Mariabad and Hazara town should be restricted to their areas. So these are the two main areas where Hazaras in Quetta live. So on 25th of March, Chief Secretary, the most senior administrative authority in Balochistan, announced that the Quetta will be cordoned off from rest of the province and Hazara localities within the city will be cordoned off from the rest of Quetta. So these three examples were prominent, but there were other incidents which were not even reported. Places like Civil Hospital and the State Bank of Pakistan have unofficially asked their employees belonging to the Hazara community, which includes doctors as well, not to come to work. In other incidents, a pregnant Shia Hazara woman had to hide her identity in order to receive medical facilities in Kuwait. So, and we are also publishing a blog on this story as well. I mean, one could have given a benefit of doubt that no, Shia Hazaras were not a target. But the follow-up campaigns on social media made it clear that the Shia identity was the center of blame when among the whole cabinet of Imran Khan, two ministers, Ali Zaidi and Zulfi Bukhari, both are Shias, were picked up and targeted by extremist sectarian organization on social media. And there was this whole campaign in which the virus was called Shia virus. So from the outset of the outbreak, both federal and provincial governments appear to hold a preconceived notion that Shias are the main carrier of COVID-19, because there were nearly around 1,700 non-Shia pilgrims who came from Iran, and they were not quarantined, and they were, had some minor temperature screening. Similarly, Pakistani citizens returning from the UK, US, and European countries, which were highly affected by COVID-19, were allowed entry with no quarantine required, and in some cases, not even having their temperature checked. So these selective measures point towards the existing mindset where a specific group is classified as a potential transmitter of the virus. In cases where religious minorities were not directly blamed, their members were denied food aid on the basis of their identity. One such example is Hindus and Christians. On 28th of March in Liari, one of Karachi's densely populated areas located in the south of city, members of the Hindu community were denied food and ration bags. There's an organization called Selani Welfare Organization, one of the leading welfare organizations, had stalled a camp in Liari. And one of the Hindu activists informed me that when they saw their identity cards, they refused to give the ration bag, and they said that it's not for Hindus. In other incident involving the same organization, Selani Welfare, Christians were denied food rations. A video circulating on Facebook shows a man named Adnan informing a news reporter that Christians have been prevented from receiving food in Karachi's Korangi area. According to a report, a cleric named Abid Qadir, who ostensibly had Selani's operation in Korangi, instructed workers or volunteers not to give rations to other than Muslims. In another video, a Christian woman confirmed that an organization which she did not name refused to give food to Christians until they recite Kalima, which is a declaration of Islamic faith. So, I don't have time, but I would add, as CREED, we are exploring and investigating the reports in which Christians and Hindu sanitation workers were not provided PPE in different parts of Pakistan. So coming back to the central question which Dr. Rashmi put in the beginning, that who is a rightful citizen? In Pakistan's context, the short answer is Sunni Muslims. I know a few would say that Tablighis were also blamed for spreading the virus in Pakistan. But the most distinguishable point I see here is Sunnis were not blamed as a whole, as in the case of Shias, where the whole community faced the blame, or Christians and Hindus who were excluded in the food distribution simply belonging to non-Sunni Islam. So for now, I think I would stop here and I can discuss later in the next section.
Yes. Thank you, Jaffer, for your contribution. And I think there are sort of these patterns emerging, these patterns of discrimination and of describing the non-citizen as the diseased, body and so on, which hopefully in the discussion we can tease out more. So thank you. Nirja, last but not least. Is she there?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rashmi. I'm right here.
Mm-hmm.
And taking the focus back to India, which is, of course, as is usual, somewhat overrepresented on this South Asia panel. As I see it, this pandemic has laid bare, in a way that no other event in my memory has done, the deception of citizenship. Not only has it not been the great leveler that it was initially proclaimed it would be, it has been particularly harsh on two sections of marginalized citizens, against both of whom the law has been deployed antagonistically, disciplining and punishing one and disowning, even forsaking the other. Now, the first of these has already been dealt with by Mahtab and by Adil, but let me just flag it. This is the punitive use of the law against citizens belonging to the Muslim minority in a variety of ways. The use of the pandemic to stigmatize and polarize, the arrests of mostly Muslim activists who'd been vocal in the protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act, and the targeted criminalizing of the infection itself in Uttar Pradesh through an ordinance that provided for life imprisonment for, quote, death caused by intentional COVID-19 affliction, unquote. So the kinds of charges that Adil mentioned about spitting on fruit and so on were, part of this. In all of these, religious identity has been abstracted from citizenship identity, rendering Muslim citizens as Muslims only, with complete silence on their identities and their rights as citizens. The other deafening silence concerns poor citizens, especially migrant labor, including large numbers of Dalits and adivasis, who've effectively been abandoned by the law. And we're talking here of an estimated 20 to 30 million people. And today we've a new study on a survey of Madhya Pradesh tells us that 60% of the returning migrants to Madhya Pradesh were Dalits and Adivasis. So that pretty much confirms what we all along suspected. Now, when these people leave their villages, they effectively leave behind their identities as citizens and acquire the identity of mere workers in the city, where they are rendered invisible, faceless, devoid of rights, both as citizens and as workers. I'll elaborate on this in a moment, but before I do that, I want to very quickly review the results of a few early studies that have documented the impact of the lockdown on these laboring citizens. So the SWAN report, the Stranded Workers Action Network report, showed that 32 days into the lockdown, and we are now, I think, on day 77 today, but 32 days into the lockdown, 4 of the 5 workers who reached out to SWAN did not have access to government rations. More than 97% had not received any cash relief from the government. Only 6% had received their full wages, 16% had received partial wages, and the rest nothing at all. Now, initially, as we know, the government asked private employers to pay their workers' wages. The employers pleaded, and the Supreme Court agreed, that they could not pay because their enterprises had been locked down. But the author of the lockdown, that is the government, did not, as many other governments across the world did, and these were not always left-wing governments, did not step into the breach to take responsibility for the lockdown and to provide compensation. I don't want to labor this point, but even Ashwini Deshpande's a recent piece has shown that Dalits and women have been disproportionately affected by loss of employment in this period. Overall, livelihoods have been devastated, households have been made vulnerable, and food insecure. So let me return to the question and to the point that I was making about the rights of these millions of laboring migrant poor. Because such rights as they notionally have are tied to their place of residence, leaving their homes to find work means giving up their modest array of citizenship rights, whether it's the right to vote, or the right to food security, or the right to work. The documents that they would typically have, the Aadhaar card, a ration card, a voter ID, are all tied to an address. Even at home, they are often deprived of their welfare entitlements, and as we know, some people have died for want of medical aid or starvation simply because their Aadhaar card had not been seeded with the relevant other card. When they migrate, they are denied even this basic minimum because their meager welfare entitlements can be accessed only in the place where their existence is certified on paper. Therefore, to move, to migrate, is to become a worker, giving up on all one's rights as a citizen. So what of their rights as workers? Mostly no formal contract, little protection from labor laws, no guarantee of a minimum wage, and no social security of any kind. In fact, appallingly, even as the migration was on, the laws governing work were being amended by ordinance to extend working hours and to reduce the modest protections that workers notionally enjoyed under existing labor laws, all of this ostensibly to encourage investment. But over and above the deprivation of these basic needs, migrant workers were being subjected to arbitrary police brutality while trying to get food or even just to use the toilet. Cases were filed against them under the Disaster Management Act for what? For violating the lockdown rules when they were trying to walk home. It's only this morning, day 77 since the beginning of the lockdown, that the Supreme Court has directed reconsideration of these cases and asked the government to actually drop these cases. Initially, they were denied buses and trains, as we know, while planes were sent overseas to fetch another section of citizens who were called stranded Indians. But these Indians stranded within India were completely ignored. They were not stranded Indians in the eyes of the establishment. When they got home, as we know, some of them were even hosed down with chemical bleach. Now, we are all aware that informality implies precarity. What we have not perhaps adequately recognized is that in practical terms, informality amounts to a depletion of legality, a sort of attenuation of moral personhood, of juridical personhood, a state of being abandoned and disowned by the law rather than being protected by it, of the mockery, therefore, of the constitutional guarantee of equal citizenship. Our clamor, folks like us, for the right to be forgotten in the context of data privacy now seems deeply and embarrassingly ironical when we think about some people's right to be remembered, to be respected, and to be provided for. These were just brief opening remarks. I decided to try and stick to your time limit, but I'm happy to answer and to develop on some of these later. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Nirja. I think you also added some really interesting dimensions to the discussion today, especially thinking about the way in which the law is being used or not used and questions of legality. And of course, your very evocative phrase, the deception of citizenship that the pandemic has exposed. So hopefully we will have time for each of you to develop on some of these points. I'm just looking at some of the questions that we've received so far, and I invite our other participants to also ask their questions, but I'm trying to abstract something from these questions which could be asked of most of our panelists. Well, the first question, I guess, is I don't know whether it's a clarificatory one or whether Karthik Das has some other ideas in mind, but he's asking, how is the CAA violative of the Constitution? So the question of the Constitution and citizenship, I guess Nirja or Mahtab or Adil.
Let Mahtab do this.
Okay.
Nirja can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll ask Nirja to reply this question because she has written an extensive piece in India Forum. So I think she'll be the right person to.
Okay.
I've written too much, and I've written too much and spoken too much on this, but I don't know what the Karthik, you said? Yeah. I don't know what Karthik has in mind specifically. I think the issue has been discussed and discussed at length in last months. I mean, very, very briefly, Articles 14 and 15 of the Constitution would appear to be violated, even though the Supreme Court is yet to take a view on this. The right to equality and the principle of non-discrimination, especially discrimination on the basis of caste, religion, caste, creed, and all other identities as well. So I think there is a clear violation of the principle of equality and of equal citizenship.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else wants to come in on that? Mahtab or Adil, or should we move on? The next question, it seems it's for Malathi, and this is from Mara Benadusi, who is asking, I guess, about the kind of two-pronged approach of the Sri Lankan government. One is sort of trying to open up the country again to travel and to foreign business, while at the same time containing citizens along ethnic and religious lines. And I guess to some extent, this could be broadened out to the other contexts, national contexts as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the moves of the government are linked also with wanting to have elections, because right now they don't really have a budget to work with, because you need parliament to pass that. So there's been quite, desperate measures to have, a date set for the elections or the general elections. Mm-hmm. So this has also resulted in various kinds of accusations about the fiddling of the figures of, how many are infected, how many fatalities. So, there are other kinds of reports that have come out that say, there are many more who are infected. Right now, we only have 11 fatalities. Mm-hmm. And so, others are not getting counted. And there's very little testing really being done, and that some people are being tested over and over again without it, spreading. So in that context, there's also then concern, yes, of opening the country out to tourists. We're going to, I think, we're serious kinds of financial, issues that we're facing. So I think the government is, desperate to, get back to, some of those earnings we've had, and we are very much dependent on tourism. Mm-hmm. In terms of the quarantining, right now, a lot of the quarantining is happening in terms of the military who are infected, as well as the migrants who are returning. And the argument is that it's clusters and that we never really went to the stage of community infection.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mala. There's one question from an anonymous attendee about resistance. And I think that at least in some of your presentations, Mahtab was talking about poetry and how Shaheen Bagh became, this symbol of resistance from people who have typically been seen as, oppressed Muslim women. And of course, the kind of violent erasure of that space, although the memory still carries on, and so on. So perhaps this is something that all of you could reflect on a little bit, which is that how do we resist, what is going on? How do we resist these attacks on this question of citizenship? Perhaps if you have one or two examples that you could share with us today. So whoever would like to begin. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So since there is a nationwide lockdown, and I've been talking to some of the protesters in different parts of the country. First of all, what is interesting to note is most of the protesters are right now doing two things. One, they are waiting for lockdown to end so that they can start protesting. But more importantly, what they are doing, they are helping stranded people, they are helping migrants, they are providing help, whatever help they can do. So recently I had done a profile of 4, anti-CA protesters from different parts of the country, young Muslim women. So Nabia Khan in Delhi, Rehana Sultana in Assam, Shaheen Praveen in Ranchi, Jharkhand, and some Shiva from Hyderabad. So what they have been doing is, as I mentioned in the during my presentation, that it is also sort of uh, 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 time where they have got some breathing space, but at the same time, and they are trying to imagine and reimagine the ways they 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 should be doing things, because things have also changed over a period of time, and most of these people have cases on them, so it's really difficult for them. So that is another thing to consider. So that is happening, but at the same time they are not silent. What one can see, that whatever means they have of social media or something, because uh, in different, say in different states, especially Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Telangana, and Assam, there are several of their comrades and friends and the co-activists are in jail. They have been booked, charged in different cases. They are running campaign for their release. That is another thing. The third thing which is happening is, especially these poets and artists, what they have been doing, they have started doing online, online events. So like webinars, they are also having online, say events of protest poetry, using digital means to spread their voice and concerns,
Yeah.
and connect. So these three things I could see happening in this period.
Okay, thank you, Mehtab. Would anyone else like to come in? Yes, Adil.
So I identify myself as anthropologist, and often this discourses on citizenship, protest, and everything is very much focused on Delhi, Mumbai, Ahmedabad, and Calcutta, and they are definitely important. I think making rights claim and these social movements, or within this, I think this movement, we usually understand that through movement we actually make rights claims, and that's how we gain citizenship. But here, the entire movement was on securing the citizenship, especially the legal aspect of citizenship. But on the other hand, my advice is always to, especially when we talk about that, how we can resist this regime or how we can resist. My idea is always that I believe that okay, the protest and everything is happening is very well and good, but we also have to focus, like Mahtab Bhai talked about, that how women in Supol were actually protesting, or I know my friend in Barsoi was protesting, this small city in Kathiar, or how these citizenship protests actually spread in very small pockets of be it West Bengal or Bihar. But also this protest has to sustain in ways that they should be credible organizations which actually protested, and they should actually make active patron-client network in local sphere, because unless that happens, that unless they are, so recently the cyclone Amphan affected West Bengal, so how you are actually there and making these active these local patron-client network, and you are sustaining it, and so that whenever a Muslim boy is picked up by a local thana, that you have enough people to gherao it and to secure the release. So these are the everydayness. So politics can't be like limited to these one small event that happens often in cities, but it has to be embedded in the everydayness of these villages, or in these small talukas, or these subdivision offices, where be it to secure local ration card, to protecting people from these atrocities of the state forces, and also how you align with other local forces who are possibly struggling for the rise of crop prices, or better deal at the mandis and everything. So that's how I think these small networks which actually got involved with citizenship struggle has to make a credible organization, and then they has to, so that especially I believe, I'm very pragmatic about it, that unless you have these networks of support and unless you have a credible impact on the electoral outcome, discourses have its effect, but electoral outcome is what matters in the end.
Okay, thank you for that, Adil. There's another question that perhaps, and this is, it says to all panelists, but perhaps Jaffer and maybe a couple of other people could respond. This is from Geeta Sehgal, who asks, following the resistance question, can panelists comment on NGO and other voluntary responses? I guess it also ties in with what you were saying, Adil. Who is taking the burden of food, medication among civil society? What are key political religious organizations like the RSS or the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, etc., doing? And so on. Are they managing relief? She's heard about demands for conversion, but are these organizations active most widely on behalf of governments or raising their own funds? So I think a really important question, because of course, we know that in times of crisis and emergency, this becomes a really important site, for relief, but also for ideological work that gets carried on and intensified. Jaffer, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I think that question is divided into two parts. The first part is in the Pakistani context. I mean, interestingly, one of the organizations that was really prominent during the relief program is called Jafferiya Disaster Cell, which is a Shia organization. So first they blame Shias for bringing a virus in Pakistan, and then there is a Shia organization which is active providing food relief. So, I mean, Imran Khan announced that they will, organize a kind of tiger force which will provide relief to the affected areas, but still, I don't know what happened to that, but it's not present on the ground. So right now, I mean, organizations like Jafferiya Disaster Cell, AD Foundation, and Silani Welfare, these organizations are primarily looking into providing relief to the affected areas. And I mean, coming to the question, what is Jamaat-ud-Dawa and other organizations are doing? So these currently, I mean, on paper, these organizations are banned, but these organizations are working with different names. And I mean, there was this video in which, I don't remember, there was this cleric who was saying that very proudly that we have converted a certain amount of number during this relief program or during this relief drive. So there are a few cases in pockets where these organizations, for example, Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, they are misusing the situation, and in some cases they are outrightly denying food relief to especially Hindus and Christians, and in some cases they're taking this opportunity, to convert those people, especially in Punjab and the Sindh side. So yes, these two things are happening on right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Would anyone else want to respond to this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can. So on the Indian side, I mean, the RSS and their different organizations have been trying to project that they have been doing a lot during the lockdown and this period. But in reality, it has been already, Niraja has explained that how the state is missing. And of course, and what we see that virtually this relief work is being done by civil society organizations, not only by the established ones, but largely the unestablished new ones. So you will see a number of organizations, small organizations, and I was saying also people who were involved in anti-CA protests and other things, they are also taking parts. Interestingly, so like Jaffer was saying that Shias are doing a lot in terms of relief in Pakistan. That and they were blamed, but they are the same people are doing a lot of work. A similar kind, if not identical, similar kind of situation is there in India. I have done a tweet thread on my Twitter. You can find how across India several organizations or Muslim individual are doing this. Meantime, this RSS is trying hard, and especially their organization Seva Bharati. You might have come across a video of Indian cricketer. What is his name? I'm not into cricket, so I can't remember. He recently he said that Seva Bharati is doing great work, and that's why they should be supported. This was not Gautam Gambhir for sure. Gautam Gambhir is a BJP member, BJP MP, but I think Indian captain who was the captain recently, the short guy, yeah, Virat Kohli, right?
Kohli.
So
Virendra Sehwag.
no, Virat
Kohli. Kohli.
So he released a video.
Even
So-
Bhattacharya did a show on the RSS work in Mumbai.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you for that. There's a very interesting question that has come via email, and I think we'll take a couple more questions and then start wrapping up. This has come in via email, and the question is, this person is curious to know more about the role of invoking pseudo-scientific ways of tackling the virus, which are largely and traditionally Hindu in nature, such as vegetarianism, yoga, Gayatri month, lighting candles, etc., in framing the responsible citizen. They're also curious about the burial politics in Sri Lanka and how the burial practices of Christians are being justified if it is within this logic. So, yes. Nirja, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah,
Your reflections on this whole...
Just no, I don't have any profound reflections on this. I mean, I agree that this has been, this has been a part of the state response, including, from one of the ministries which has been set up for this purpose, Ayush. But I think this has somewhat lost momentum in recent weeks, especially as the curve has been rising and rising and rising. I think these kinds of these sorts of ideas about natural remedies or or banging of plates and lighting of candles and so on. I don't think people have very much time for this kind of thinking when they see the number of cases rising on a daily basis, even the number of deaths rising. So I think it's lost momentum, but I mean, one can't be too certain of that. How does one know for sure? But certainly it was a part of the initial response from the side of the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's part of their larger focus on yoga and so on. So it kind of feeds in.
The larger focus is the delegitimization of science per se, and the distrust of expertise of all kinds, including scientific expertise, which is why we've seen the kind of confusing messaging that we have encountered in recent weeks, whether it's from the medical establishment, whether it's from the Council of Medical Research, whether it's from government, and a lot of this is at cross purposes, and it's not. We have very little clarity of the kind that we should have had if professional epidemiologists and others had been allowed to do their work. Instead of which, we don't even know about numbers. We have no reliable statistics. We have very little reliable knowledge simply because of this distrust of expertise and science.
Yes.
So I just wanted to add one point about this decrease in this kind of, say, messages doing rounds. I was talking to the founder of Alt News, Pratik Sinha, and he told me that initially when this COVID thing came to knowledge of the people, there was a lots of messages about pseudoscience and these kind of things. But the moment Tablighi Jamaat came into picture, so that diversion happened there, and so that is also an aspect to be considered when we think about decrease in these kind of things.
Yes, thank you, Mehtab. Malathi, do you want to say something about Christian burial practices and?
Well, actually, before that, I would just like to comment on, we also had similar moves where we had actually allopathic doctors talking about Ayurvedic methods, which is very surprising, and it got very Sinhalized in certain ways as well. We also had a lot of the religious coming forward, and saying, come pray with us, go on pilgrimage. And actually we had the sacred mountain where, people go on pilgrimages, but primarily Buddhist, where the chief priest was refusing to stop the people coming in, saying, we've withstood so many disasters and diseases, and the power of the God here is much stronger than all of that. So I think there are very interesting religious inflections, and I saw that happening within the evangelical churches as well. So people were actually going for services even in the context of curfews and things like that, on this assumption that, and there were leaflets being handed out saying, if you come to our particular church, we will guarantee that you'll be safeguarded from the virus. So you had people making use of that. In terms of the burial, actually, I think this also goes back to the animosity that a lot of Catholics have to the Muslims since the Easter Sunday bombing. So we actually had, in this context where, the Muslims were asking for burial, the Christians coming forward saying, we are quite happy to be cremated, in the name of science, in the name of our country to safeguard, So I think we had the other side of this as well that was visible.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anyone else wants to come in on this aspect? How is this playing out in Pakistan, Jaffer? Not to put you in a spot.
The pseudoscientific,
yeah.
I mean, there are so many. I mean, if you are part of WhatsApp University, you do receive these podcasts, we say. So there are, including Prime Minister Imran Khan, who actually came up with this stupid idea that this corona will go away when the summers will come, and we have like 40, 45 degree and the cases are rising. And then he himself said that it's more like a flu and it will go away. And now he says, no, it's not a flu. Why people were saying it was a flu? So, I mean, situation in Pakistan is completely bizarre. And I mean, there was this question of how the protests are going in Pakistan. I would say life is very normal in Pakistan. I mean, people are protesting. Recently, Baloch were protesting for their enforced disappearances and demanding. So things are happening in Pakistan, and with massive misinformation in this WhatsApp groups. So this, totka of having ginger, and so it's all around. So yes, it's the same situation. It reminds me of Ahmed Riyaz, hum bilkul tumhare jaise nikle. So it's the same in Pakistan.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, maybe I'll take one other question, and then there's one question which I think would be a good wrap-up question as well. But this is a question about caste in India. I guess Niraja sort of mentioned it in terms of the migrant workers and the majority of the ones who are fleeing and returning back to their villages. The numbers so far show that it is the Dalits and the adivasis who are, part of this group of returning migrant labor. But in general, when we think of citizenship and caste and the pandemic, have there new kinds of fault lines emerged during this period? Anyone wants to reflect on that or say something about it? Nija, would you, yeah? Or Adil, would you add something to this?
So one thing is about the composition of migrant laborers. So that is for sure, as Nirja was referring to today's report in Indian Express about Madhya Pradesh, that how 60% of the returning migrants are, say, from Adivasis and Dalit communities. So that is there. But what we have been also reading and hearing that in lots of cases that they are basically two things. One, they are denied of, say, relief materials. Things are not reaching to them. So take for Jharkhand. So the earlier government in Jharkhand, which was a BJP-led government, which changed in December 2019, and a new government changed. And it had become infamous for hunger deaths. But that has been continuing in the current regime also. And there have been several deaths in April itself. And if you look at the people who have died, they are from Adivasi communities, so or Dalit communities. So that is, so they are deprived of the food and basic facilities. That is one thing. The another kind of discrimination which is happening and continue happening, which was a normal, which was happening in normal situation as also, that was in many cases, the people who are quarantined, they have refused to take food because it is being cooked by, say, so-called lower caste people, people belonging to lower caste. So that is another. And like Muslims, we also know that people of, say, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they live in, or they are forced to live in enclaves or quote unquote ghettos. So there is, I mean, as Adil was saying, that they are, say, they are locked in their localities, in their enclaves, and often since they are also attached to, especially Dalits, are attached to quote unquote dirty works. They do dirty things. They clean dirty things, and pandemic is linked to that. So that is also playing a very important. So caste is very much there. It is being not just practiced, but I have been hearing and reading that uh, there are several new fault lines of caste and class, of course, caste and class during this lockdown.
Thank you, Mehtab. That was a very comprehensive response. Okay, so I think in terms of, yes, Adil.
So to add what Mahtab bhai said, I'm not an expert on caste, so but one thing is very important to note that caste remains central. That this is just not economic issue, because most of the Muslim migrant laborers from Uttar Dinajpur, Malda, or these parts, they have been notified by the West Bengal government as the OBC, and most, like 95% to 90, I think 8% of these Muslim population are actually OBC in that part. And even during, you see that even, so the distribution of worry or distribution of suffering is very much obviously along the caste lines. So within Muslims, there is very, in that sense, this work between ashrafs who have the access to social and economic capital, and then who are actually suffering are possibly these lower caste Muslims, in the sense, obviously in the Hindutva narrative, we are all one, and definitely in different levels of discrimination is there, but the worst sufferer are obviously those who are in the lower rung of the caste hierarchy. And also important to say that during the CA and NRC, when the discourse was going, very few people know that at the time in West Bengal alone, 30 people actually committed suicide, and in that sense that they don't have documents of this sort, and these 7 among them were Muslims, and these 7, I think maybe the number is higher because it's only what I figured from local newspapers from here and there, and most of them, these 7 were also possibly OBC Muslims from these different districts of Jalpaiguri or Uttar Dinajpur or Bardhaman and Murshidabad. So in the sense that it is not an economic issue alone, and I think in Paul Farmer's work, that is structural injustice, is very much there, that's how the distribution is suffering within caste line is happening, that happened during the CA crisis or right now.
Thank you so much. So I guess it's time to move to a concluding question, and then to ask each one of you to, say something for a couple of minutes each, and then we will end. And I guess this concluding question has also been asked by one of the attendees, and I think it's perhaps a good one to end with, which is that what happens once the pandemic is over, or once it subsides? What lies ahead for citizenship struggles once we are out of this period of an intense emergency or crisis? So you can address it anyway, or pull together some points that you would want to elaborate as your concluding remarks. And perhaps we can go the other way and start with Niraja and work ourselves.
What lies beyond? Hard to say, because we, at least in India, haven't even got to the top of the curve yet. So it's hard to say how prolonged this will be, what the fatalities will be, what the impact on society will be. All of those questions are still open questions. It's still a little early to answer them. I think, picking up on some of the points that were already made when Mahtab talked about the resistance through online events, online poetry, fighting cases to defend arrested activists and so on. I was comparing this then with the question of migrant workers that I had raised earlier, and thinking that in the case of the migrant workers, it's about relief and not about resistance. And if you think about the way forward in that sense just today, there's an extensive report. In fact, I think it's on the wire. It's a story from Punjab. It's a story of how so many people who own industries, I think they were mainly in Ludhiana, have sent buses, taxis, and some have even flown back workers to return to work in their factories. The interesting thing is that they interview people who are coming back by plane from Patna, I think. But on the other hand, there are buses that have gone from Punjab to Allahabad and have come back empty. So workers have chosen not to return. And obviously it's not because of mode of transport, but it's more than that. And I think that's the interesting question. We have to wait and see how this pans out, whether people will, even the poor will in that sense, vote with their feet, how they will respond to the situation after. But sorry, there was one other small thing, but I'll stop here for the present.
Okay, thank you, Niraja. Jaffer?
I think there are many things to discuss, but I would like to make 2 points here very quickly, which I've observed during COVID-19. First, the effect of Pakistan's policy of weaponizing religion, particularly in domestic politics, is now appearing and hitting back. Federal government literally surrendered to the pressure from religious groups who openly rejected government's policy of closing down mosques. The thing is, the Pakistani state, particularly its military, has strengthened and patronized these religious groups so much that they are now openly challenging the writ of civilian government. And I don't know if I have time, but I was surprised when the Sindh government and federal government both allowed Shias to hold the procession of 21st Ramadan, commemorating the death of Imam Ali. The government faced backlash from Sunni groups and forced to open and allow religious congregations in the last 10 days of Ramadan and Eid prayers. And that was a disaster, and its repercussions are now visible. And the second point, which I want to make, which is more alarming, is the involvement of ordinary people discriminating Christians and Hindus. I discussed in a piece I wrote for The Diplomat, and there is a rising presence of religious hardliners who are enforcing their prejudiced views on welfare organizations such as Salani Welfare. So this is a dangerous trend because these welfare organizations have been helping underprivileged and many working class people benefit from these organizations. This shows that the notion of otherization of different religious group at the state level is now making space among ordinary people, which is a very alarming sign. One of the attendees asked this question, what happens? And this is something many Shia Hazara also wonder. What will happen once this COVID-19 is over? Will the stigma associated with the community disappear, or will it haunt them in the post-COVID world? How, when these Hazaras will resume their jobs in different places, how their colleagues will see them? So this is something which the community look for the answer, and something we are not sure. And possibly for next 3-4 months, it will inform us how this blunder done by the Balochistan government and then the federal government will have their effect on the community. So yeah, we have to wait.
Okay, thank you, Jaffer. Adil?
So one of the important ways, obviously, what is the way ahead, I think have been talked about by economists like Abhijit Banerjee, the direct cash transfers and everything. One thing is important that other economists like George raised, and they have raised question that why there is not much protest happening by these migrant workers when they are suffering so much and everything. And I was just wondering, and I was talking to people back home, and one thing I found that the diffuse nature of Indian governance is very much actually to blame. And I think in this sense, that's how the central government will face a little bit heat. So when lot of these 5 lakh workers are coming back to their villages, ultimately they will demand that they are getting rations, the 5 kilogram rations in their local village or not, whether they are being employed by the Narega or not, because they borrowed money, 30,000 rupees, 40,000 rupees to reach their home, bought bicycle or sold their wife's jewelry to reach and make these very arduous journeys. And within this journey, obviously there is anger against the Modi government, but by the time they're reaching, the immediate anger will be against the local government, that what they are actually getting on the ground and whether they can got back. Now the question is whether they will go back to Mumbai or these industrial centers or not. But for now, for the next 6 months when they are there, whether they can rebuild their life, whether they are getting the rice and pulses, or whether they are getting these, so the Narega will be a very important tool to calm the anger in the rural, to actually help these people. And if not, then I think already, as I said, that BJP is making inroad in North Bengal, and they are also the charity organizations associated with right-wing forces. They will also use this, I think, anger to, and by the time the anger that is there against the central government will be very much diffused. So how, I think Hannah Arendt talked about it, that on revolution, that if you are like hungry, how you are like at the time going to, I think going to protest. So right now we have to see that these 1 million workers, I mean, I can talk about my part of West Bengal who have returned, that what are their immediate concerns and whether they're getting direct cash or these rations or these employed in local Narega or not. And these things will shape the local politics for 2021 Bengal elections.
Thank you, Adil. And I hope you can make your way back to soon, yeah, with your PhD. Mala.
Yeah, just speaking up on what Niraja and Adil were saying also, and I think this was a question that was also raised by Indrani Chatterjee on Facebook, the historian. very interesting one of saying, you know, there were these masses on the streets on their way home, desperately hungry, but why didn't they raid, you know, the shops around them, right, which are all shuttered? What kept them from doing that? And I think that was a very interesting debate, which now I won't rehash. But I mean, just thinking about resistance and also thinking about the future. I find it very interesting that in Sri Lanka, we're using this discourse of saying, because of the virus spreading, you can't have demonstrations. And that's a very standard way a lot of people, you know, show their protest, right? So it has led to, I think, a lot of individualized then protest, as I think Mahtab was also talking about, which I think has its, you know, positives and negatives, you know, that it depends on who has the technology to be accessing these things. And then, of course, you know, you can have very interesting views and also very problematic views being transmitted. And as Jaffer said, you know, the WhatsApp university, my God, yeah, that's alive and kicking in Sri Lanka as well, especially when you're isolated in your homes and, you know, you're just like checking everything that's coming on WhatsApp. But I won't end, I think, on thinking about a more troubling scenario also that we're heading to, in that there's been talks, and this is happening already in China, of having people linked to various kinds of apps that can trace wherever they go, you know, and we have returned to a kind of surveillance of ourselves that earlier, when it was trying to be put into place, there was so much protest. But now suddenly, in the name of safeguarding us from this little virus, people seem to be much more amenable now, you know, to putting some app on and, you know, noting where you're heading and all that. And I think that's a very, very troubling trend.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Malti. And Mahtab.
Yeah. So two points basically. So what Niraja was saying about, and Niraja and Adil was saying about migrant laborers. So I just received a press release from Jharkhand today that those who have returned to Jharkhand, they have already started facing problem of unemployment and other things. So that is not just limited to Jharkhand, but also Bihar and other parts of so that is one concern is going to be there. And it is very important to remember that when people leave their house or migrate from, say, Bihar to Delhi, it's not all the same going back to home after, say, 5 years or 15 years or 10 years. I left Bihar when I was, say, 14. So it's not same kind of thing. But at the same time, in being in Delhi, you are not recognized as Delhi wala. So for a migrant, and this is I'm speaking from of a privileged point. But think of ordinary migrants. So that is one thing. The another thing which is a very alarming thing is this, and that is linked to CA, NRC, and NPR, is that the central government has not said anything. So it is just on hold because of the pandemic, because of the lockdown. There is no decision. There is no. They have not been taken back. So that is going to be there. And since two important assembly elections are coming up, first Bihar and then Bengal, I'm afraid that despite all this, and it has already started. So 2 days ago, a BJP, this Home Minister Amit Shah did a virtual rally from Patna. So, and Rajnath Singh has addressed a rally in Maharashtra. So, given the election in Bihar and West Bengal, and both are very crucial for the ruling party at center as of now. So, I am concerned and afraid that even if despite all these problems, migrants and ordinary voters across religion and caste have faced, I'm afraid that when it comes to voting, it will be not very different. So that is there, because the moment lockdown will be opened, those things will be tried, and it is very clear they are not going back to going back on them on that.
Okay, thank you, Mehtab. Thank you to all the panelists. I learned a lot, and it's, I think you've all raised issues and questions that will make us think for a while. So thank you for your time. I know there are, lots of pressures on everybody's time during this period. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to all our participants, to all our listeners who took time out to listen to this. And of course, we will also be with all of you. So thank you once again. Stay well and stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Very much. Yeah, thank you.